Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians Podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the kind who use the Bible as a prop. So if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter and I'm your host. I'm the professor of theology and the lead pastor of the Loft Faith community in Los Angeles, California. And today I'm delighted to be joined by
Reverend Blair, Everest,
Julia,
and Wesley.
The alphabet strikes again.
Every time.
It'll always be tough.
No, it's really just my distracted brain.
We learned it in elementary school.
Right.
It's been a minute.
It's ridiculous, man. I know. Anyway, great to have everybody back. And there is obviously a lot of stuff for us to unpack. Today's episode, we are going to talk about the assassination attempt on the president and what happened at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Sunday, the 26th. And just to follow up from that and the manifesto, quite honestly, and the theological implications of what was said in there. You may have figured out by my intro, we're going to be talking about Russell Brand and other men.
Terrible men.
There's a lot going on right now. And so that's kind of how the episode is going to break down today. But most importantly, I guess right off the bat, before I say anything else, we want to be clear, and it's obvious, anybody listening to this podcast knows that all of us condemn political violence, like in terms of trying to assassinate the president. I'll just say that some of us may feel a little bit differently about violence in general, but whatever. Political violence, politically motivated violence, assassination attempts, this destabilizes our democracy and just makes things so much more complicated and difficult for us to begin to cultivate the change that we actually want to see in our world. So this episode, we aren't trying to be pro-violence or anything like that. It's more about analyzing the arguments that someone was trying to make and the reaction that happened and then the fallout as a consequence of that. Before we get into it, we want to invite you to become a supporter of the podcast. If you like this podcast, if you've been a loyal listener, we would love for you to become an official supporter. You can find a link to make a tax-deductible donation in our show notes. A one-time donation is great, or you can sign up to be a monthly supporter. We also want to invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, the Love Your Neighbor newsletter on our Substack, which will be coming out in just a couple of days. Excited about the newest one. So let's get into it. The shooter left a manifesto. If you have not had a chance to hear about it or read it, I don't know, and I guess I should have said this by or run this by everybody. Are y'all okay saying his name, or do we not want to say his name, or how do y'all?
I don't even know his name.
I didn't bother to commit it to memory.
Yeah.
So
people, I think
there's
we
so
can
many.
just call him the shooter at this point.
Yeah, okay, yeah, or the attempted shooter.
Alleged
I guess he did
shooter.
shoot somebody. The alleged assassin.
I don't think that
Yeah.
it's an assassination attempt. It's a security breach. There's a
Well,
difference.
they've
On
charged
that
him
note-
with the intention or attempt to assassinate the president. They got to prove that in a court of law. But
Yeah. But I think on that note, Julia, let's get to before we get to the serious, let's start with the funny. His just straight up burn of Kash Patel and the Secret Service, to me, like in the PS of the because so what happens, I think it's like he said an email or something. He said like another email where he just goes off on just how unprepared people were for something like this that could happen. And so like he literally says, he said, P.S. Okay, not that this happy stuff is done. What the hell is the Secret Service doing? Sorry, I'm going to rant a bit here and drop the formal tone. Like, I expected security cameras at every bin, bugged hotel rooms, armed agents every 10 feet, metal detectors out the wazoo. What I got, who knows, maybe they're pranking me, is nothing. No security, not in transport, not in the hotel, not in the event. Like, this is the line that got me. Like, the one thing I immediately noticed walking into the hotel is the sense of arrogance. And I just thought, if this doesn't fully encapsulate this administration, the sense of arrogance, it was wild just to see how somebody could just stay in the hotel, like literally check in the day before, and they'd be like, yeah, I'm just going to walk around with all these weapons. Like, that is it is wild. It is crazy, and it seems like it might be easier to take down the empire than perhaps we realize.
Well, and
That's
what I
all.
can't understand is whether this is new for the special service, like Secret Service. Like, is this incompetence something that is with this administration because of their leadership decisions, or has this been the case for the Secret Service for a while? Either way, I think lambasting the Secret Service is like, yeah, you're failing at your job if this was your job.
And if we're gonna put our tinfoil hats on for a minute too, like the shooter, alleged shooter, is talking about how easy it was for him to get in, but there were also a lot of like weird clues by attendees that they kind of knew something was going to happen. And so there is a little bit of me that's wondering, like, did they actually catch him sooner and let him go ahead with his plan so that they could make the argument that they have to build this ballroom so that things like this can't happen? Like,
so
there's
we
a
aren't
little
talking
bit
about Iran, and now we're talking about
exactly like I think probably the Secret Service had information that this young man was going to attempt something, and they let it happen to change the narrative. Now, he was on a separate floor from the ballroom. He didn't make it past security. Like, this was not actually a threat, and the perimeter did work. So the argument that like we have to have a $400 million ballroom to protect the president and the leaders of the country is like, it's not true. The protection worked. But also they were like, truly, like Caroline Levitt said some weird things, and like people were just behaving strangely before.
They're always
dinner.
behaving strangely, and they were like taking pictures and smiling afterwards. I learned through this that President Barack Obama had many such attempts on his life. He just didn't complain about it, and his Secret Service was more efficient and more effective. So I don't know. I think that these people should look inward.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at our administration. I mean, Pete Hegseth just got rid of vaccine mandates for the military, which is like absolutely insane.
It's a great thing.
I mean,
when has disease ever affected the army?
Exactly. I mean, we actually have vaccines. Literally, we have so many vaccines because of the army, right? Like Blair, I agree. I think there's a way in which you can obviously read the weaponization of these, not only like assassination attempts, but just with this administration, there always seems to be a objective to distract from what they're actually doing, right? They, flood the zone kind of way. And so I think that's a reasonable analysis. It sounds tinfoil, but in some sense, in this administration, it kind of doesn't, especially because they pivoted immediate afterwards, start talking about the ballroom, which is just like insane.
Right.
But anyway, I think, I guess to get back to the manifesto and like the arguments that the shooter or attempted shooter is making, one thing I want to say, for me is, after reading it, there's often this narrative around mental health and people that do these kinds of things. And there likely is something that isn't fundamentally right about someone who decides they want to act in this way where they want to take somebody's life. But when you read what he wrote, it definitely reads as someone who's thought out the consequences and is like sorry, but doesn't feel like there's any other way. and also what thing I noted is like when I teach my ethics classes, I have my students say, this is your argument, and you have to respond. Like, here's the counter argument. You have to respond to the counter argument. Like, that's how he structured. Like, he was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is the objection, and this is my response to the objection. And I was like, you know what? This is maybe he took
Good
another
work.
class.
You an A+.
Yeah, I got an A+ because his counter arguments aren't good. He at least got a B. He got like a B-. You know what I'm saying?
I'm like, properly. Good for him.
We love a B.
Yeah, his structure is definitely, I was like, well, yeah, okay, all right. At least I felt like I had an understanding of that he had thought through the consequences of his actions, So, but I do, there are a couple of things that he pointed to that I know we want to lift up as it relates to the kind of things that we talk about in this podcast, which is, theology and the intersection of politics and the way this can lead to people to be active in the world. And he, at the end of this, thanks his church community. So he clearly is a person who's somewhat religious, if not have been raised in religion, but he makes references to the scripture passages that talk about turn the other cheek and render under Caesar. And so let me find the where he says this. Yeah. So I just want to kind of go through this, and then Blair, I'll turn it over to you because I know this was something that we wanted to kind of dig into, the theological argument. And so we know that turn the other cheek passage is in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's a part of a long discourse about how how the marginalized and oppressed folks are to respond to their oppression. And so he writes in his manifesto, objection 1, as a Christian, you should turn the other cheek. His rebuttal says, turning the other cheek is for when you yourself are oppressed. I am not the person being abused in a detention camp. I'll just say that. He uses the R word. I'm not the fisherman executed without trial. I'm not a school kid blown up, or a child starved, or a teenager that's been assaulted by the many people in this administration. Turning the other cheek is when someone else is oppressed, or turning the other cheek when someone else is oppressed is not Christian behavior. It's complicity in the oppressor's crimes. I obviously that's not an accurate reading, but I can see how someone gets there, right? That's what I'm trying to say. I can see how he's reading that, and I'm like, I kind of see that, but Blair, I wanted
Can you share how?
Okay, well, yeah, because I think that when there's a way to read that passage about turning their cheek and make it about individual behavior, not approach it to like structural change, especially if you aren't and haven't been taught about the power of civil disobedience and civil resistance. Because I think what Jesus is saying in that passage, it does apply to individuals, but it's about a particular framework from which we have to create the change within our community to then create like larger structural change, right? In the context, I don't think Jesus was even or could have been thinking about taking down the Roman Empire, because it wouldn't have been possible, right? But he could change the conditions with which they would be interacting and engaging with imperial forces. And so I think that's the kind of nuance he's missing. But Blair, I want to. So I guess that's how I see how someone can get there, Julie, is they can see that and say, well, this only applies to me because he's talking about from an individual perspective. But I think in the broad context, I think he's just missing the broad application that I would argue Jesus would be consistent with the rest of the Beatitudes, basically. So
so let's back up, and because he doesn't give the scripture, so let's for those who don't automatically hear a scriptural reference and take their brain exactly to the page. Turn the other cheek is a reference to Matthew 5:39, where Jesus is speaking on the Mount of Beatitudes. It becomes the Mount of Beatitudes. He's giving the Beatitudes on a mountain in Galilee.
It becomes the Sermon on the Mount. So yeah.
Right. And it's this instruction. Okay, Matthew 5:39. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn them the other cheek also. And then also he tells a story of if someone asks you to carry their pack a mile, carry it 2 miles. And if someone asks you for your cloak, give them your robe as well. And so it's this like 3-part sequence of if someone does wrong to you, sort of do the extra. And I'm not the only one who knows the like traditional progressive perspective on this passage. Does somebody else want to give us sort of like how we usually read this in progressive community?
Yeah, I mean, the person who's probably most well known for kind of unpacking this passage is Walter Wink, and he teaches that within the context of like ancient, or the context of the time this was written, basically. So, and kind of that culture, the way in which these actions were done were actually subversive. So if you would turn the other cheek, basically what he's saying is you're inviting a Roman imperial soldier to, rather than hit you with a ball, a fist, basically, like to punch you. If you turn the other cheek to your left hand or your left cheek, you're inviting them to open face slap you with their left hand, which is it would be seen as a act of like kind of cowardice, a way to treat someone that but if like as you the aggressor doing that would look poor upon you because you're hitting them with your left hand and it's open handed, so it wouldn't be seen in the same kind of powerful, wouldn't be received in the same kind of powerful way. Like, it is a way in which you kind of reverse it and put the person that's doing the oppression in the space of doing something that would look bad on them, not just for the oppression, but for how they did it. And each of the other two tasks that he has in there with respect to going the second mile is also something like there was culturally assumed that you could make someone carry your pack 1 mile, but to go 2 miles would be deemed abuse within that framework and culture. Giving someone your coat is basically nudity. They're saying like if they want to give it all to them, right? To really embarrass them by saying they've taken all my clothes. So it's really about putting the oppressor in a position to where their oppression looks bad on them from a sense of embarrassment. And so that's the whole context of that. And I think, and then Wesley, I'll toss it to you, that importantly, we can't forget the next segment of verses talk about love. It talks about love your enemy. Like he says, like you've heard it says, hate your enemy. I'm like, no, love your enemy. And I think you can't divorce, like my biggest critique is you can't divorce that, sentence from the rest of the broad context of the Beatitudes. But I know, Wesley, you had something to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think I fully hear that, and I you've talked about that sort of showing the violence and the way that the person doing the slapping or the punching is then like the badness rebounds on them.
Yeah,
but I think the place that I struggle with is in our current context. It's not as if the violence being done by Donald Trump or the violence being done by these multinational corporations or the violence being done by the federal government. It's not as if all those things aren't already like plain for people to see, but it has not sparked a sufficient enough change for people to feel like, oh, this is a strategy that is working. Because I think one of the things that relies on is there's got to be some sort of like self-reflection on the part of the abuser to like feel like that what they're doing, that the eyes being turned on them about their evilness will move them to change. And in our current system, it feels like the violence itself is just a baked in part that is so normalized that it's hard to like hold a mirror to something that they're like, yeah, we know and we're okay with it.
I think the strongest counter argument to that, though, Wesley, and I think that's definitely just truth in that. But to me, I think the way in which people now view Israel, particularly because of Palestine, is the strongest counter argument to your point. Because what is happening, yes, still genocide still happening, right? But when you look at the numbers and the response and the lack of people who support, like there has been a dramatic shift, right? A dramatic shift in the last 5 years of people, the way they think about Israel and Palestine. And the unfortunate part, and this kind of takes me back to what happened with John T. Moore on last week, is like the history of South Africa shows, like it talks about how long it takes with international political pressure to get people to change kind of things like that. But that wasn't even, you wouldn't even imagine that even being possible, right? To have these people countries boycotting Eurovision, folks suing Israel, like all these things are happening because of the showing the violence, right? And so to an extent, I agree, but I do think there is, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, like it cuts both ways. I just want to acknowledge that, but I know Everest, you had, well, a lot of people, all of us got stuff to say. So
I disagree with Wesley. I think that there is like been. It feels like the last 10 years have been this like version of turning the other cheek, so to speak. And like, if your framing of the Sermon on the Mount is the one that we're speaking within, there have been an overabundance of moments of, I would say, very kind of honorable resistance that directly framed the violence of the people in power. I think that has continued to escalate. I think a lot, or even most centrist people have kind of had to like choose which way they were going to swing. And I think that, yes, it takes time. Yes, it is exhausting. And also, I think it's hard when it seems like the worst thing that happens when the violence is captured in many explicit ways in a way that makes the people that are perpetuating the violence look worse and worse, when the only reaction is just kind of people saying, oh, that's really bad, and not the violence ever changing or going away.
Yeah, because I think what I would add to that is I think the people who most directly experience the violence have had that. I think you're right that the perspective on Israel has shifted from the people, but not from the people in power, not the people who have the ability to do something. And so I think that's that's maybe what
That's
he's
what I'm
speaking to.
saying.
And then the other sort of example that comes to mind is just like mass shootings in this country. Like the people who are the receivers of this violence, they've for sure had a change of heart. I think there's still plenty of people in our country that would never move to think that the Second Amendment has any sort of issue. But the people in power have taken very little steps, even with massive social pressure, to make changes. And so I guess what I'm saying is I can see where he's coming from, that like as an individual, we're having those reactions of like turning the other cheek and feeling like this is the right move. But the people who have the ability to make change, the people that the Roman Empire that we should be holding the mirror to, seems hell-bent on not changing, on continuing these cycles of violence.
But the thing is, even when the people in power themselves are subjected to the violence and the harm, they still don't change their minds. Like we all watched January 6th, and like we all saw them all running and quivering and cowering and crying and praying. And they still, as long as their check clears, it doesn't seem like they care for their own lives. So it's like, what is there to do?
Yeah, and this is an important question of like that I think is the root of why Dr. Carter was saying like he kind of agrees with the attempted shooter, that the root of the interpretation from Wink is that each of these actions of sort of malicious compliance in response to an act of violence, it depends on the shame of the oppressor, and particularly the one of go the second mile. If a centurion was allowed to have a local person carry their bag the limit of 1 mile, there was a legal limit. And if they carried it 2 miles, then the centurion would be punished. So there was like a legal protection against the oppression of the local people. But when the people committing violence, like Wesley said, feel no shame, refuse to enact or respond to people as if they are equals, which is part of the turn the other cheek, right? When you slap someone with an open hand, you're treating them as an equal. When they refuse to enact the laws that are meant to protect people, then is turning the other cheek actually still a viable act of resistance?
And I don't know the answer, but it's hard. It's like a tough question to exist in this empire with that reality.
Exactly. And the alleged shooter is saying the argument will be we're supposed to turn the other cheek as Christians, and that's usually sent towards people as like a misunderstanding of that passage, of the idea that like, oh, we're supposed to be nonviolent, which means we're supposed to be passive. But also, I'm not sure it means we're supposed to be violent. But when the nonviolence isn't working, I understand the desire to try something else.
Well, because
what's left?
Like if there's nonviolence and there's violence, if those are is there a third other option or a fourth and fifth other option that we're just not aware of? I mean, I think like, in theory,
things they're never binary, like to that 100%, extreme.
100%.
Sure. Like, no, but okay. Like diplomacy. I would love that. That seems great. Can we try, I don't know, democracy? No, not that either. Like, so, okay. Anybody?
Yeah.
What
We're
else?
We're going to come back around to this question, I think, with a reflection on Bonhoeffer. Do you want to do that now, Dr. Carter, or do you want to hit the other scripture passage?
I think I want to say one thing about the to kind of get, I guess, maybe start answering some of these questions, because I have spent probably too much time in my head thinking about them. I think that we can't divorce Jesus' teachings from his overall strategy of actually creating a community of resistance that was both resisting the exploitation that they were experiencing at the hands of their own leadership, the Jewish leadership in the temple, and also the Roman imperial leadership, right? And so I think it's a part of a broad strategy. And one of the successes of each of the civil rights movements that we had in this country that utilized nonviolent resistance is it's part of a broad strategy, right? Not just one-off acts. And I think so. That's one thing I wanted to say. At the same time, the challenge we have in terms of accountability, Wesley, and that all of y'all talked to actually, right? Talked about like it requires a degree of shame. We don't live in a representative democracy. I think that's fundamentally the problem. Is the way our democratic system is set up. We don't have enough representation, particularly like in the House of Representatives. And so like the mechanisms by which we actually could create the change that actually that could begin to use the leverages of power have been manipulated since the 1920s, such that the House has a cap on it of 439 people. And we have, so you have overrepresentation of certain demographics. All that to say, between that and the Supreme Court, is that we don't live in a representative democracy. And so that's, to me, underlying so many of these issues in terms of their effectiveness, right? And so in my mind, to then use these scriptures in a way that's actually helpful and is being subversive in their application, which requires a kind of strategy. Like it requires a strategy that, quite honestly, I mean, even as I'm doing this in my head, it is difficult because of the money in politics. So it's any number of things that we have to address. I want to say that, like, I fundamentally believe in this, and I know I've referenced the book and it'll come to my head in a moment, that in modern history, from the beginnings of modern day nation states, which we could talk about roughly in the 1700s, violent revolutions have never, aren't sustainable. Like, basically, like, after a violent revolution, there's always a fallout in terms of how a country continues to be fractured. And nonviolent revolutions tend to be the only ones that actually can lead to a stable democratic system. And so, I think, so for me, if I'm looking at an outcome, there's a part of me that wants to do what Wesley said and say, hey, I don't want the boot on my neck, right? What am I going to do? This guy sounds, he was very desperate. And at the same time, I want to be in a system where I can be free. And if violence is actually going to lead to less freedom in the long run, is it worth it? And I don't know. These are difficult answers, or I should say, difficult questions, because you're trying to answer them under such extreme circumstances. So anyway, yeah, Julia.
Well, I think in theory, Wesley, you said this to me. Oh my gosh, I don't even know what is time, 10 years ago. I don't know if you remember saying this. You were like, when we study the American Revolution, you look back and we study this group of things as the American Revolution, but when they were happening, there are all these just moments, right? And you said to me 10 years ago, you're like, it has already begun. These moments, these shootings, these insurrection attempts, these assassination attempts, when we look back 20, 30 years from now, this will all be included in it, right? And what one hopes, I think, is that any one of these violent moments would lead the people in power or scare them enough, or I don't know, just affect them enough that they would say, wow, I guess we should address something.
One thing.
A thing.
I mean,
but they're not. And I feel then it just it snowballs because
we need a ballroom to protect the bourgeoisie from the proletariat. That's what we need, Julia.
Exactly. Now, I don't. Did y'all hear about the? I don't know if I talked about this last time. The CEO from Five Guys, and I didn't. So there's this event that they had at Five Guys, kind of a special where people could get save money by buying food, whatever. That doesn't matter.
It was
the point is,
it was a buy one get one free burger promo.
that went terrible. Like it didn't roll
It
out
was-
well. There was
and
not
it was
enough
like
workers.
huge response, like overwhelmed the workers.
Because
So-
everyone's hungry.
So, yeah, and
And
so
poor.
and so the CEO gave all of his workers like a pretty big bonus for all the stuff they had to go through.
I think it was $1,000 per employee. He gave everybody
so-
in the company an extra $1,000.
And so they asked him, like he was interviewed, and they asked, like, why did you do this? And he said, because I don't want to get shot. See? And so this is why this is in my head. I'm like, and we talked about this with Luigi Mangione.
Is it effective?
I'm like, and I was like, and I was like, you know what? This, so again, it's just like, I'm not saying shoot CEOs. I'm not saying that.
No one here is
I'm not
saying
saying that. No one here is saying
Violence
that.
is the answer.
But I am saying it seems as though some people was listening. So somebody saw that and was like, you know what? I want that to happen to me. And so it just speaks to accountability. That's all I'm trying to get to. That's the point I made
Right.
about the House of Representatives and everything. We live in a system where so many people aren't accountable, and that kind of leads to where it is. So Wesley?
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll add about the United Healthcare CEO, I'll add the thing about the United Healthcare CEO that I learned several months after Luigi Mangione. The company moved to make changes, to approve more things, to make sure that they were at least doing a little better after the alleged murder of their CEO. But then the stockholders demanded that they switch
Shareholders.
back. The shareholders demanded they switch it back. So even when you're scaring people into doing better with the threat of violence, capitalism and greed and money bring people back to these exploitive structures.
Well, because
and so it's like,
the shareholders don't have targets on their back.
Not. I wonder if they do now. And let us move on.
For how long?
Exactly.
For how long?
I think so. There was another passage that was in the manifesto that we make sure we want to get to, and that was the passage in Matthew. It's often the passage we use about taxes. So it's Matthew 22 verses 15 through 22, where they are confronting the Pharisees try to trap Jesus around giving. Oh yeah, go ahead, Blair.
Yeah, I pulled up the Mark version. So it appears in both Matthew and Mark.
Oh, okay.
So I have the Mark version pulled up, Mark 12, 13 through 17. And this is, Jesus is talking, preaching. And it starts saying, then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it. And they brought one. Then he said to them, Whose head is this and whose title? They answered, Caesar's. Jesus said to them, Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's. And they were utterly amazed at him. And this short phrase, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, is used often to basically say, don't restrict or don't push back against the government. Jesus even said, let the government do what the government's going to do. We're doing something different. And that's kind of how I think it's being lodged in this manifesto, is like a rejection of like, why would you care about what the government is doing? That's not where you're supposed to be paying your attention within Christianity. And the response from the alleged shooter is not particularly theological. It's mostly like, yeah, but I live in this country and I care.
I mean, basically, yeah, his response was, he says, the United States of America are ruled by the law, not by any one or several people. Insofar as representatives and judges do not follow the law, no one is required to yield them anything so unlawfully ordered. I mean, this is the thing, man. He's talking about just and unjust law. That's what when I read this, I was like, he seems like he's in right mind. And so I think that is a fair critique. I think that's a fairly not a terrible reading actually of that, because what Jesus, I argue Jesus is talking about is not to conflate the worship of God with the worship of Caesar. He's like this taxes, that's about your, the duties that you have to the state that you're in, but you can't conflate that as an excuse to not obey God. Basically, like that is the ultimate authority that we should be submitting to. And so to try to conflate the two is to then fall down the slippery slope of making human beings God. And I think the way this guy's reading it is about, again, just and unjust law, saying we can't render anything to Caesar because this Caesar is corrupt. It shouldn't even be there. Again, if this is a theology class, interesting argument. That's all I'm gonna say. Like, I'd be like, all right, let's unpack that, but not do it with not do it with any violence. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I'm telling you, I read this now. It's like this is I don't know. So all that to say is like, well, did y'all have any other thoughts about that passage, about what he said about Caesar or anything like that?
Only to highlight that, like, this manifesto, of all of the manifestos that I've read from the people who've taken
from all of the
these violent
shooters,
yeah,
over
this one feels
many years,
the most cogent. Like, there's thought, there's reflection. So to your earlier point, like, I don't the question of like, is it a mental health thing? Maybe, but like, given the evidence that we have presented in front of us, his manifesto, it's hard for me to lean in that direction.
Yeah, no, it is cogent is definitely a good word. I'm just like, okay, this, and I think the part that, at least for me, I guess I am with this, and we'll go to break, is like, I understand the longing to feel like something has to be done. And like, that's the part where I'm just like, this, I can totally see how someone can get here when you live when you feel like you're in a system that not only is stacked against you, but every time you try to legally address a issue through the system, they change the rules, right? Like, you're trying to say, okay, we're going to do affirmative action because of all these things and then they change the rules. Oh no, we can have affirmative action for like wealthy people in these schools, but not, Black people. They create a system that actually can kind of reverse the trend of charging so much money for college education, right? So everybody can get like their loans actually reduced or figure out a way to pay it off. And then, nope, we need to change that policy to make people pay even more money for student loans. Like, whether it's like housing, all these things, like, you create policies and rules to address a problem, and then people in power with wealth change it to benefit themselves. And so this is, again, like, maybe we have another episode on like representative democracy, because ultimately I think that sits at the core of this, is that so many people are turning to violence, I believe, or to even extreme ideologies and extreme theologies because they don't feel heard. They don't feel heard. Like, that to me is like, yeah. But like, I agree. We're not, not only I guess you're right. They don't feel heard because they're not being heard. And when that happens, it makes sense. I can see the through line of someone being like, all right, I'm just going to snap because I'm not in a community of people that can help me think otherwise, or think differently. So, all right, we're going to take a break. We're going to say goodbye to Wesley. He has other meetings he has to go to. So, Wesley, thank you for joining us for the first part of the podcast.
Of course.
And we will see y'all in just a few minutes. Thanks for listening to the Progressive Christians podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please rate, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you like what you've listened to so far, we would love it if you would become an official supporter of the Progressive Christians podcast. You can find a link to make a tax-deductible donation in our show notes. And when you sign up, we would also invite you to sign up for our newsletter, and as a way to just kind of stay in touch with us and find out what things we have going on, the books we like, things we're watching, other stuff we like to talk about on the podcast that we just don't have time to get to. It'd be great if you could sign up for that as well. Well, thanks for listening, and now let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians, and not the storm the Capitol kind. After having that conversation around political violence and the weaponization of, like, well, what is it? The way a person might read scripture to lead them to think that that this is that violence is an appropriate response, that's a religious response, a theologically motivated response. I guess by way of transitioning to the topic we want to talk about now, which is just, men using this, is a part of me that wants to point out, what we see happening right now with Pete Hegseth and the Department of Defense, and which to me, I don't like. It is, all part of the same logic, at least as I am. Maybe I don't know if y'all agree or disagree, but like you hear this person, like, invoking the Bible, talking about a holy word, praying, all these, like making
This person
fake
being
verses,
the alleged shooter, or
Hegseth, right? Like using the Bible and religion to justify violence. And so this for me is all I always go back to. It's like, the danger of saying you can do such a thing, right? Because to be morally consistent, then one has to say the other group can do it too. And so this is where I kind of get a little bit stuck, isn't the right word, but just, it's like you realize how difficult this is, and how I know I can sit here and make this argument and describe it and write an essay about it, but it's still, it's going to hit different when you live in Palestine, right? It's going to hit different when you're on one of these boats that are blowing up. It's going to hit different when you're a citizen of Iran and they're like bombing your infrastructure and talking about basically, like it's going to hit different. And so that's a part of me that just finds this just frustratingly difficult to talk about. So at least I just want to acknowledge that, because I don't know. I want people to know how sympathetic I am to the plight of those who are suffering, and feel like I'm just not sure what to do.
The thing that's always the most difficult to me is not just that the Pete Hegseths and the Doug Wilsons of the world, it's not only that they misuse scripture, it's that like they don't really use it at all. Like, I feel like Pete Hegseth, at least the most recent alleged attempted assassin, at least he is familiar with scripture. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he might be misquoting it, but he's not up here quoting Pulp Fiction and being like, and saying that it's the same thing. There still is a difference.
I think part of the difference is that what we see in the manifesto is that he understands that he's going to be held accountable for the choice to engage in violence. Whereas we see a lot of other people using the Bible or theological claims to justify violence and thinking that abdicates their accountability to those that they've harmed and to the community more broadly. That if you can just justify it with the Bible, you won't be held accountable for crimes against humanity. And that's the thing that we need to really push back on and challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a history of that in this country. Obviously, when you talk about whether it be genocide or enslavement, all these other things were justified. Well, I use the Bible, right, as a prop, right? Basic is where they're using it, just like Trump did earlier, and just like we see men doing now. And this kind of is a way for us to transition to talk about the two men who are doing essentially the same thing. And so if you haven't seen it, we'll have it in our show notes. I guess first we can start talking about Russell Brand and his use of the Bible. So I'm the least like culturally informed person on this podcast. I want to maybe y'all can explain kind of what happened, if we can unpack not the clip. The clip is funny. The clip explains itself, but just kind of what he did, because he brought the Bible to his like rape trial, correct?
So Russell Brand is one of many men who have turned to sort of a claim of Christian redemption in light of accusations or actual like convictions of sexual violence. And so the ones we're thinking of are Russell Brand, Jonathan Majors, Shia Labeouf have all had this sort of like turning towards Christ. And Russell Brand and Jonathan Majors both brought a Bible with them to the trials to manage this conviction. And then Russell Brand was on Piers Morgan this last week, and Piers Morgan asked him about, hey, you had your Bible with you in court. What's your favorite Bible verse? And Russell Brand, it was just dead air. Like Russell Brand could not answer. And he's like flipping through the Bible, and you just hear like this silence with the sound of pages turning.
It was so funny.
And it's so embarrassing.
It hurt. Like honestly, I was like, I'm telling you, I was watching it and I was like, this makes me uncomfortable. Like I was like, oh my gosh, it made my stomach upset because I was like, the awkwardness of him. I don't even think he said favorite Bible verse. I think he said, what were you reading? I saw you reading something or turned to something, and he was like, "Oh, I was reading this thing in Isaiah," however he says it. He says it wrong.
Isaiah.
Isaiah. And so then he's like trying to not that I say,
But he doesn't know
anyway.
where to find it.
He doesn't know where to find it. He's like flipping around, he's like, and he's like, and just going back and forth and back and forth, and it just looks and sounds and feels like awful, awful,
Or
awful.
funny.
Because clearly, well, or fun. It is funny, but clearly, it just shows the kind of. I mean, I talked about on Sunday, hypocrites, right? I mean, that's just stage actors. Like when you translate it, just people just doing stuff, but they're not actually being authentic.
But there is a connection that you made that I a few minutes ago that I had not made, and that is the lack of accountability. So when you look through history, the ways in which no one is ever accountable for anything.
Well, that's a little bit extreme. Like,
I don't know.
But yeah,
Like in the United States, right? Like all of these terrible things have happened. And at the time they're like, well, this is what God was telling us to do. And it was manifest destiny. And like slavery was a good thing. Like all these things. And they've never had to say, actually, it was bad and we were wrong. Or like it doesn't happen. And what it's led to is the belief that if you have a Bible by your side and you can cling to it hard enough, you will never have to be accountable. Like you don't have to say, like if you can say, well, my Bible said that I should do this horrible thing, then people will be like, oh, well, that's okay then. Like, and so now you have these men sitting on trial for abusing women, holding Bibles.
Yeah, and I was inspired by a post from Gerlin Henry, who's a priest in the Episcopal Church in Canada. And she made a great video talking about this, like, abuse to conversion pipeline of like these famous men using a conversion to Christianity to sort of like whitewash their poor actions. But there's the question of how sincere is that conversion? And even within the tradition of Christianity, if you convert, it does not absolve you of your actions, right? You still have to be held accountable by the community to not just confess, but to repent and to actually like change your behavior and repair and to make good with the people you have harmed. Like that is part of the conversion process. It's a great video. We'll link to it, but we are seeing this as like a pop culture phenomenon of like bad men hiding behind the Bible, and then we're seeing it obviously within our political sphere as well.
Well, and it makes me so mad because like this is at the center of our faith, is that like redemption is possible and that people can grow and that the worst things that we do should not define us for the rest of our lives. And so this like kind of redemption theater happening at a societal level, I think like also plants more cynicism in us, even at an interpersonal level, when the people around us maybe have hurt people and are trying to do better. Like faith is a very real and powerful way to kind of work through the process of causing harm and reckoning with that and forgiving yourself and seeking forgiveness. And I think that when there is someone in like a really high up position / highly viewed position using this in a way that feels disingenuous, I think the thing that frustrates me the most is that it also harms the ability of people to do that on a smaller and less highly viewed scale as well.
I agree. And I think it does impact people's ability to take it, to question people's authenticity. Like, and how what that does to long-term undermine our confidence in each other, our confidence in when someone says that they have, I don't want to say converted, but it undermines our confidence in the way in which people actually engage and practice Christianity in a fundamentally serious way, right? And so at the same time, and Drew, I'll toss to you after I say this, like one thing I wanted to at least name is the fact that this has been, not only it's been happening for a long time with clergy. Like clergy will do something crazy, something abusive, male clergy. When I'm saying, I'm talking about white, usually white men, but male clergy, and then they'll say, "Oh, I made a mistake and I repent." But they actually are for. There's this way in which I think is a certain strand of, we might say, evangelical theology, but also just some strands of Christianity that has this idea that if you ask for that all you need to do is ask for forgiveness, and that the sin you have done is washed away, and it doesn't actually take into account the repair that has to happen to the broad community because the impact of your failure to love, right? Like that matters, and that is in scripture. Like that actually is in that's some Hebrew Bible stuff actually, in terms of the repair you have to do to the community, and that's just completely disregarded when you think about sin on such an individualistic level without thinking of the social and structural consequences of your sin. It dilutes like really what we're talking about when we're talking about the long term, or we're talking about the impact of sin and our failure to love. And so that part for me is what's frustrating, is to use this kind of like once saved always saved kind of thing, or just ask for forgiveness and everything's okay, without going through the process of repentance and repair. Is, I think, it's a fundamentally flawed way to think about what it means to practice Christianity, to do as Jesus invites us to do, to go beyond the mind that we have and turn back to God. Like that I think it's not the way of Jesus. But I know I talked for a while. Sorry, Julia.
Well, I have questions because you and I, Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, I've come to you with questions regarding the idea of the act of forgiveness and repentance, and like what comes first and why. And like you've mentioned, like, oh, but forgiving someone isn't for them, it's for you. Sure. But forgiving someone when they don't deserve it, or when like they haven't repented, yeah, sure, that's for me in theory, but like when and where does accountability become a thing? And like, how does, if someone has done something that I'm supposed to forgive them for when they feel no remorse and I'm still harmed, but then I still have to forgive them for the sake of forgiving because that's what I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm still not buying it.
I think forgiveness is for you, because I don't think you're forgiving someone for the sake of forgiveness. I think you're forgiving someone so that you don't allow the seeds of hatred to be deeply implanted in you, because hatred consumes you. Hatred doesn't
Sure.
just stay. Let me finish. Like hatred doesn't just like it's all consuming. Like it will eat at you. And so I think forgiveness and accountability are just they're separate. I do think people need to be held accountable, but I think the danger of living in the space where you or not forgiving someone is that you are closing yourself off to the spirit, the way in which I think it moves within us and pulls us towards love. I think it's much more about allowing yourself to heal, because often what you're asking for forgiveness, it's not so much you are forgiving perhaps the other person for what's happening, but often there's some guilt and shame and other stuff wrapped up in there that you got to forgive yourself for allowing, or for this thing happening. And so in that sense, it's a letting go, a moving past, but also knowing that, again, that's something that's separate than accountability. Like accountability is a different process that you may long for and that you should work for, but holding on to that resentment, I think ultimately, Jesus thinks, you know what I'm saying? I think it ultimately does more harm. I'm not reinventing the wheel. Blair?
But I would argue that forgiveness cannot, each person gets to decide how forgiveness works. But I know that there is a struggle in the process of true forgiveness if the harm is still occurring.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because the repair has not happened, cannot happen if the harm is still being inflicted.
Yeah, I don't think you can actually forgive. I don't think you can forgive if the harm is still happening. Like, I just think
And
like,
frequently,
yeah.
right, we ask people, especially oppressed minoritized people, including minoritized genders, to forgive abusive structures while the structures and the people in them are still actively causing harm. And that
And
is tricky.
I
Is
think
there a difference between redemption and forgiveness?
Ooh.
I mean, I
good
think
question.
redemption, you're talking about more, that to me sounds more like salvation, I guess, conversation, rather than forgiveness, which is more like in terms of how you're in a relationship with someone, like on a more immediate level. So that's how I would differentiate them. But Blair, does that sound right to you? I
I
don't know.
would
I've never thought about
say
that.
that more important related to the question of repair and forgiveness is reconciliation.
Yes.
That if we're seeking redemption, then you're going to like impose upon someone to forgive you no matter what. But if what you're seeking is reconciliation, then it has to be a mutual process of repair and recovery. And I think that maybe is part of what we sometimes get wrong in our theology, is that we're trying to fight for redemption, when in reality, what we really need to achieve the beloved community, the kingdom of heaven on earth as it is in heaven, is reconciliation.
So like reconciliation is a prerequisite for redemption.
Yeah, I think so.
Everett?
I don't think so. I think that in an ideal situation it is, but I think that sometimes in situations where I think reconciliation with yourself and God is necessary, but I think that redemption is having some kind of security around knowing that that whatever happened that was causing harm or that was failing to love will not happen again. And I think sometimes that I'm a reconciliation king. I love reconciliation, but I think that in the cases when it's not possible for whatever reason, I think redemption is still able to be achieved if there is a real strong foundation of why something happened and why it won't happen again. Like in my head, forgiveness is looking back, redemption is looking ahead, reconciliation is like a balm in the present moment. But I don't know how we even got on this topic, but
I think we've unpacked a new topic for a whole new episode.
Yeah, I mean, and now, yes, we did, and that's okay because
Sorry.
well, in part because I think we're talking about like the way in which someone or people can do these harms, these men, and not be held accountable, and what does a process of repair? To me, repair looks like. I like repair better than like reconciliation. I mean, to me, they're similar, but and that's why I talk so much about normalizing repair. Like, there's a process by which we have to do that. I think forgiveness one can only actually ask for forgiveness or even forgive someone else once the harm has stopped. To your point, Julia, like that's, I think, a fact. Unfortunately, I think I don't know that there's a way for any of this to move forward unless those who are oppressed actually invite and start the conversation of humanization of our enemies. I do think that's why Jesus says we have to love our enemies, because they're not incentivized to see us as a human being, but only through in relationships with us, direct relationships, can they potentially see us as full human beings. And I think with respect to this idea of thinking about forgiveness and reconciliation, I think, again, we have to think about what forgiveness is. And so this is what I teach in my class about this, and then we'll wrap up. I just want to make sure being very clear. I said, forgiveness is simply being able to see the offensive person clearly, unclouded by the crying needs of our own interior movements, and being free of the need to make that one suffer because you suffered. It is a path of restoration to self-empowerment, free from the power the offender has over our sense of self-worth, security, and dignity when they violated us. Forgiveness is not forgetting about the offense. Forgiveness is not excusing the offender for their offense. Forgiveness isn't letting them off the hook. Forgiveness is not minimizing the severity of the offense, nor its wounding impact on us. Forgiveness is not ever being triggered by the offender again. Forgiveness is not becoming reconciled to the offender and being in relationship with them again. Forgiveness is not the prerogative of any other person or party except the one who has been injured. Forgiveness is not willed or forced. Forgiveness is hard. It is a journey. It's a grace of a person for healing. Forgiveness is not reconciliation, because reconciliation is the restoration of right relationship between us and the offender. Such restoration requires that the offender also seek right relationship in appropriate ways. Reconciliation requires from the offender recognition that they indeed perpetrated a violating act, remorse that they feel sorrow for the suffering they caused, restitution, an attempt to make even symbolic amends for the injury and repair the damage they caused, and restoration, a commitment to their own healing, addressing the causes that gave rise to their behavior in the first place. And so, like, that's when I'm talking about, I'm teaching like nonviolent resistance and compassion and actions, all this stuff I teach in my constructive theology class. That was in my lecture notes. Cause I'm like, cause this comes up so much, Julia. It comes up so much because of the way in which we live in a society, unfortunately, that is built on violence. So I know we need to wrap up. This episode been a little bit all over the place, but I think sometimes that happens. All right, so we have some good news, and I'm gonna do my best to pronounce these names correctly. But two pieces of good news. The first one: oil drilling has been stopped in the Maya Biosphere Reserve, a protected area spanning roughly 2.1 million hectares in Guatemala. They are not only protecting the area, but launching an initiative to restore the forest. The Maya Kichi and Itza groups have advocated for this for years, and this is a huge victory for them, really, and for us all and for the planet. This forest is the second largest continuous tropical forest in the Americas, and it's home to hundreds and hundreds of different species. And secondly, for the first time in 43 years, wild rhinos have returned to Uganda. Rhinos were released into Kidepo Valley National Park, reversing the 1980 declaration of their local extinction. For the Itzo and Karamojong communities living near the park, the return of the rhinos carries cultural as well as ecological weight. Elders in the region remember the animals, and younger generations will now encounter them for the first time. So awesome
The
news.
earth is healing.
Exactly. Lord knows we need it. Lord knows we need it. So I want to thank y'all for listening and watching and all the other good stuff to the Progressive Christians podcast. The Progressive Christians podcast is a ministry of The Loft, a worship community of West William Methodist Church. If you would like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on all social media platforms at The Progressive Christians. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Please send us an email at the Progressive Christians at theloftla.org. Our show is produced by our amazing producer Spencer, and we want to give a shout out to our audio engineer AJ, who's moving and still gonna be part of our family and always in our hearts. Grateful for everything that he was able to help us with and to get everything off the ground. If you like the show, please rate, share, review, subscribe, all that good stuff on whatever podcast platform you are using. Thanks for listening, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.